Hey, welcome to the Healthcare Nation podcast. I'm your host, Rick Janata, and we are a month into the podcast. And I want to thank our listeners and supporters who've been out there finding us on Apple, Spotify, and our YouTube channel. And of course, for our guests who've been kind enough to come on the show, share their insights, expertise, and perspectives, and probably most importantly, their time. It is deeply appreciated. Today, I'm with our producer, Ben Castro, and Ben and I committed to have an end of the month kind of wrap-up podcast that bookended the months on items that our team here finds new and noteworthy. Certainly, these are not intended to be an all-inclusive list, but we're hoping it'll be of value and add something to your day, at the very least for entertainment purposes, hopefully more than that. So before we begin, a quick disclosure, as we usually do, the podcast is meant for informational purposes only. The views expressed are those of the hosts and guests, not meant to be associated with any organizations, companies, or educational institutions. So with that, Ben, we got a lot to cover. Let's dig in. What is on your mind, my friend?
Rick, like you said, catch up end of the month, beginning of the next, January to February. Thing that's on mine right now, PHE, public health emergencies.
Yeah, so look, this is been in the news for certainly the last couple of years when you think about the pandemic coming on board. Obviously, they were put in place at the start of the pandemic in the early 2020 period, renewed every 90 days since then. What did it do in general? It expanded access to care, telehealth benefits, eligibility for Medicaid. This was a big deal. Why? Because it ensured, obviously, Americans having access to care via telehealth and other modalities that are out there, technology, et cetera, but also for that Medicaid coverage, it gave them coverage. Now, the consequences for this is that the removal of, you could say, the Medicaid side will probably put pressure on the finances of hospitals, doctors, and other folks who are relying on payments, reimbursement for taking care of that Medicaid population. So this is just a reality that I think has to be recognized out there. Also, I would say the consequences of what's called Title 42 that deals with migrant populations from Central America, Cuba, and I believe Haiti are also going to be impacted by the ending of the public health emergency designation. So that's it in a nutshell, so to speak. If I was to say there's any good news, and I try to always look at the optimistic side, the Medicare telehealth waivers that were put in place, or the telehealth waivers, they got such, I think, a degree of positive response, support, investment. The clinical outcomes have been outstanding. These are going to be active in legislation, certainly through 2024. We know that CMS extended payment parity between visits for telehealth or in person through 2023. So, look, I think there's a positive note in the advancement of that technology specifically. So again, want to end on the positive, but this is a big change, and it's going to, we're going to have to look at the impact of this over time as we move forward.
Definitely. And now, Rick, you mentioned a good, you talked about COVID. What's the latest? What's going on with that? I haven't heard, give us an update.
Sure. Look, let's just say again, for informational purposes, this isn't a science show, but we like to keep tabs on what's happening in the policy arena, also with respect to what's in the scientific literature. So in general, I could say in general terms that cases are declining in the United States. I think everyone would agree with this. At the same time, paradoxically, there's still like 4,000 new hospitalizations that are happening weekly. Also, COVID isn't gone. And we know that there are variants and that some are more transmissible, like the new Omicron. I think it's XBB 1.5 that's out there. That is out. It's making up a bigger proportion of cases. It's got different profile, perhaps more virulent. We got to study this more and more. In the universe of still crazy stuff going on, a preprint study looking at mutations basically said with some new drugs that have come out, I believe from one of the prominent drug companies, that viral samples that were taken from patients who were on this drug demonstrated that there was some changes in the mutations that were a little bit faster than they would have seen in a regular trial or study. I'm not an expert on this, but I think the bottom line is this. If drugs are causing problematic mutations, researchers could say there could be some circumstantial associations and worry that this could create a more contagious version of COVID. So mutations with some of these drugs, as the viruses are challenged, they respond, they get stronger, et cetera. So sound familiar, Ben? It's the old story. So this is a lot to, again, got to keep an eye on this as we move forward. It's been a devastating situation. It's not gone, but I would say this declining in general. We know that.
And that's good. I love that. Now, what about the political perspective post midterm?
We'll start on the COVID piece, and maybe that's all we'll talk about with respect to this broadcast. But I will say that administration health officials, and we knew this was going to happen with a change in the Senate configuration and what happened out of the midterms, that they're going to be pulling a lot of top administration officials who've been out there to testify on what happened with respect to the COVID-19 response. That's going to happen in a couple of subcommittees coming up. I think one is energy, the other one's commerce. So that is going to be, I think, big news. The FDA commissioner, Bob Califf, will be out there, as well as the director of the NIH and CDC, Rochelle Walensky. So
now in the buyer beware aisle, all right. Now this is something that blew my mind, Rick. What's up with the stories about the fake nurses? I heard about this and I was blown away that this was something that's happening, and it's not just a couple cases. It's a lot of people. A lot of people with this. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, this is something that got my attention. And when the team brought it up, I said, whoa, this is scary stuff. So 24 individuals busted in Florida for their roles in a fake nursing diploma scheme that was happening in the state. I don't think it's limited to just Florida. I should say that. I think this is happening everywhere. This is just high profile. And at the end of the day, it was illegal licensing and a shortcut for folks who wanted to be nurses, a laudable profession, obviously. But you got to pay your dues and put in your time and learn if you're going to get it. But what these folks were doing was selling these fraudulent degrees and diplomas and transcripts from accredited institutions in Florida. So very, very unfortunate when you think about this. So when I think about this, as a healthcare professional, I started my career in nursing, still have license there. It tarnishes the reputation of nurses who are out there practicing, folks who are right now in nursing school, legitimately, again, paying their dues, doing the work. And it really does, I think, create another situation where we have distrust in the systems. There's no doubt we've got a serious staffing crisis and nursing shortage. This is driven by many, many factors. It needs to be addressed clearly on the educational front, the funding front, I would say wages. I think technology, leveraging that, new models of care, it needs to be applied to nursing, absolutely. But the reality is that stories like this only adds to the growing levels of a lack of public trust in our healthcare system and the processes that we have. So it's very, very unfortunate.
Now, Rick, I know you're a big supporter of the role and benefit technology and AI specifically can play in the health sector. Anything to add in that arena?
Yeah, thanks, man. I love AI. I love technology in healthcare. I think leveraging that for the benefit and good of health, wellness, taking care of people is so important. The one big thing that I would say is that Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, said last week that, with respect to AI technology, so artificial intelligence, that guardrails cannot be established by tech companies alone. I thought this was a big statement to make. And he basically called out the fact that there has to be responsible and ethical approaches to artificial intelligence, that there is an impact on national security, that there's obviously a correlation with our economic competitiveness. There's no doubt about that. And that AI technology should serve society broadly, not narrowly. So we should not leave anyone out when you think about the application of this. And this sticks with, I think, the themes that we talked about with AI and the metaverse in our last show, and it is perfectly suited for healthcare on the delivery side, but also what's happening on the development side. So good comments, again, at least in my mind, from Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, with respect to the guardrails with AI in those areas.
Man, you made some really good points. Those are great. Now, we're gonna come off the topic a little bit. Still around the same part. But I've been watching this series, Rick, The Last of Us. Have you heard of it?
Oh yeah.
And it's really made me think about the future. But not only with the viruses and COVID, but now the fungus and what role that could potentially play in the future. Can you do you know what's happening there?
Yeah, look, and you know this first, and I said it earlier in the podcast, I'm not a scientist, right, in this respect, so we're not going to get into the science, but I think there's some things that we know are happening out there. Dangerous fungal infections on the rise. We see this in healthcare. I think infectious disease physicians have always been challenged with funguses when they do take hold in human populations and individuals. No doubt about that. I think the research that's out there is suggesting that warmer temperatures could play a role in these fungal infections, getting more traction. So at the end of the day, let's just say 98.6 degrees has been the, kind of our line of demarcation, the line in the sand that has kept, funguses at bay and in check, because it's too hot for most of them to survive in anything above that. But if it changes because they're adapting to more heat, more conditions within the environment that allows them to let's put it this way, create a resiliency to those temperatures, that could be problematic. And of course, if it happens to the human body, as a lot of this research is suggesting, that could be devastating. So I think with respect to the series you mentioned, clearly this is one of those things that I hope it's not art imitating life. Let's put it at that place on the shelf, but it's something we've got to keep an eye on. There's no doubt about it.
Definitely, and it definitely brings some alarming. It could be in the future. So, like you said, we definitely want to keep an eye on that. Now, the health sector future. I'll stop short of saying market positives and negatives. Can you give me a little insight on that?
Yeah, listen, we don't do no investment advice here. We said that early, informational purposes only. But I think when we look at the markets and we look at, I'll just say, positives, no, but maybe more the winners. And I don't want to say the losers, but we'll think about it in terms of trends. If you're going to look at the winners out there, look, I'm very, very bullish on artificial intelligence, the metaverse, the role digital twins can play, and the avatars in clinical care, its impact on medical education, the whole wearable side of things and technology, what can happen in the home. This is a big area that I think is going to have more investment, have a lot more opportunity for development, and the impact factor will be incredible for healthcare delivery. So I'm very, again, bullish on that area, and I would call that a winner category. The other side, and we had a great podcast with Dr. Art Kaplan on this, what's happening in the longevity space, right? The investment in longevity, the advances that are happening. Clearly on the genetic side, I think there's a lot that we're learning still in the discovery phase, but also on the therapeutic side. So there's big interest. There's a, dare I say, consumer level to this that is probably, driving not only the investment, but I also think some of the research. So that's another area that, again, I would put in the winner category. When you look at neurology, the human brain, everything that's happening there, whether it's the diagnostic side with imaging, whether it's the treatment side with drugs, therapeutics, et cetera, the advances in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, that area, leveraging technology, pretty incredible. Perhaps the first phase would be early diagnosis, allowing for maybe lifestyle change and early intervention. But let's just see where that goes. But again, very, very bullish on that. I think there is a return of pharma, right? In my mind, it's been kind of not dormant, but we haven't heard a lot. But certainly with, again, the pandemic, the public-private partnership that allowed the acceleration of drugs, the discovery side, mRNA, regardless of what folks think about it. I think there's a return on the pharma side. We've seen this. I just mentioned what's happening in neurology in the brain, tremendous advances there, but it doesn't stop there. We see a lot of the new inhibitors, weight loss, et cetera. Pharma, I think we can say is having again a return. I also think that anyone who is looking at workflow automation in hospitals specifically, from the bedside and the clinical applications, whether it's electronic health records, the acquisition of vital signs from new and different technologies to allow nurses and other clinicians to get through their day much more efficiently, that is a big opportunity. And anything that connects an individual in their home, what they're wearing, to other devices, I think that connector space is very, very hot. I think that I'm always been a supporter of what's happening with new models of care. It's happening in the retail sector side. We've got to look. We talked before about the role Walmart will play, Amazon, and now Dollar General. Pretty incredible when you think about it. And we'll have to look at what's happening in that area. But it will continue to be an area for investment and expansion. Anything on the omics side, right? Certainly genomics, but not limited to that. When we look at advances now in the gut and other areas, the environment, et cetera, lots of room for not only research, but I think investment in that space that will be a good return. And you mentioned the fungus and the show All of Us. I think surveillance. It is something that we learned this lesson through the pandemic. We need a surveillance system. We need a weather report that takes into account bacteria, viruses, fungus, et cetera, so you could fly through it without turbulence. That's a reality. Also, avoid and intervene if you could. So that's really on what I would say the winner side. On the loser side, look, we started it. I want to end with it too. COVID. I'm not declaring it over, but we're winning in that battle. And I would like to think COVID is losing. And we've got a better handle on it at every single level. I think in the investment suite, if you take a look at what happened, let's say 2.5, 3 years ago, there were nothing but A+ good ideas, and every one of them got funded, certainly in the health sector. I think now B+ ideas are the losers. There are, it's only going to be a handful of game-changing ideas that make it into that A+ category. It's going to get much more like an environment we saw perhaps 5+ years ago with respect to investment in the health sector. And it'll be much more targeted, perhaps even segmented. So that's something to look out for. I think another, if I could call it the loser side, will be the current model of care delivery. It needs to change. I will leave it at that. We talked about that. Whatever role the consumer space will play in that, what technology will play, we know that the current system needs to be more than rebooted, probably needs to be shaken out and taken for a new test drive on a very new platform. And I also think, and I hate to put it in the category of losers, but health systems and hospitals are going to continue to struggle with financial pressures currently because of high inflation, rising costs, workforce constraints, a lot of those issues, as well as demographic changes as they move forward. So let me stop there. I hope that was insightful. Again, I want to be very clear. These aren't meant to be recommendations with respect to investment on any kind of futures, et cetera.
Rick, that was an amazing recap. Thank you so much for giving us all that insight. And, that's a nice little refresher. But I know our listeners are, really interested in what's coming next for Healthcare Nation podcast. Give us a little insight, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Listen, that is probably perhaps my favorite question today. We've got, I think, some great topics coming up. They're important. And I hope relevant for our listeners that are out there. And we're going to start with what's going on in the consumer space. This has been something that I've been very interested in, the retail consumer space, how it impacts models of care. We're going to unpack that. We're going to look at electronic health records, interoperability, acquisition of data from the Internet of Things, how you could make a clinician's work day much more efficient and their workflow, I'd like to think, not only efficient, but adding value to the patients they serve so we could hopefully increase access and take care of more folks. We're going to look at health system leadership, its role with the changing challenges that are out there, and what a CEO of a health system now might have under their purview, including things like housing, food deserts, and just the community trust in general. We're going to look at that. And then what's happening in the world of pediatric innovation. I think we don't give enough time and attention to that space, what's happening in children's health, the advances that are there, the promises for that very, very important younger generation that we're here to take care of. So listen, a lot happening. What started for me as a passion project, I hope will grow into something that adds value for our listeners, at the very least entertainment, perhaps at the most something where you could get your imagination thinking, be part of the solution with respect to what's happening in our nation, and more specifically for us, the healthcare nation. So Ben, thank you for what you're doing in the control room. You're modulating perfectly as usual, and great set of questions from you and the team. I really appreciate that. And for all of our listeners out there, check out our website, healthcarenationpodcast.com. Listen to us on Apple, on Spotify, and our YouTube channel as well. So thanks, Ben.
Hey, Rick, thank you so much. Always a pleasure, and I can't wait to do some more.
Catch you next week.